Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the latest brainless utterances of Nigel Farage, who, well, like a few other Brexiteers, is complaining because EU countries are making the sovereign decision to decide who comes in and out of their country, you know, how their borders are managed. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, as a result of Boris Johnson laying it on good and thick about the very serious threat posed by the new variant of this virus and its prevalence in the south of England, we have faced a severe hit to our trade routes with Europe, essentially. The government insists that they can still get the vaccine into the country via military planes, no matter what, which is just as well, because the vaccination programme quite frankly, is now a race against time. Because if you've now got a situation that the government have to admit is out of control, you really need the vaccine in place. Not that that will help the people who are infected, but to try and get ahead of where the virus has not yet infected. Johnson carried out a press conference yesterday, I talked about it earlier, to assure us that things would be looking up next Easter. So the usual deflecting questions about the crap state of the country under his government, with promises that the good times are just a few months away. As I also talked about yesterday, the current issue is, so either Boris Johnson was exaggerating just how serious this new situation is, just so that he could excuse not implementing the tighter measures earlier, or he is not exaggerating. And just to be clear what I mean here, because it seems the COVID deniers have woken up, I'm not talking about exaggerating by making up details of the new variant. I'm not suggesting that at any point. What I'm talking about is, to what extent is it as serious as he was suggesting? Of course, having a new variant that is more likely to be infecting others is serious. But is its prevalence really responsible for the massive upturn we've seen recently? Or given that it coincides with when we ended the last lockdown and entered a crap tier system, is it maybe because his crap tier system isn't really doing the job? So that's the situation. But the thing is, let's say he is exaggerating it. What that means is he basically closed off our trade to save face. That's going to cause a massive economic hit. Massive. If he's not exaggerating, then what he's actually done, because he knew about this 2 weeks ago, he has failed to warn our neighbours about the threat in time. And so they will not trust his efforts to contain it. After all, he has deceived them. And they may well maintain harsher restrictions than would otherwise be necessary, because they fundamentally don't trust him to keep his end of any word. And against that background of the most serious crisis the nation has faced for some time, arguably ever, with the worst Prime Minister we've ever had for the situation, Nigel Farage, the man that Graham Hughes calls the foghorn of ignorance, I really like that term, he piped up. He was complaining that EU countries should not be closing their borders with the UK like this, which is a little confusing, because didn't he call for the UK to close its borders? I remember at the start of this crisis he was calling for the UK to close its borders. I mean, public health experts were to a certain extent as well, but he was calling for the UK to do that. You know, didn't he and other Brexiteers try and claim that we weren't allowed to do it because of EU rules? You know, they tried to say during the first wave, well, the EU rules mean that we can't do that, that we have to still follow because we're still in the transition period. Of course, the lie became a little bit more difficult to believe when EU countries were closing their borders, not just with outside countries, but with each other. With each other. It's almost like EU countries have the sovereign right to control their own borders in their own national interests. In fact, it's exactly like that. Several people asked Farage why would he be opposed to countries deciding their own border arrangements, as you know, he seems to be in favour of that. Of course, he only meant for Britain to be able to do that. The idea that other countries should be allowed to behave as sovereign is not something he approves of. Or it could just be that he's a populist arsehole, and like all populist arseholes, he's a raging hypocrite. After all, I don't expect him to take any responsibility for the consequences of the no-deal Brexit that he's calling for. Those will be someone else's fault. Another thing to point out is that although the EU were holding discussions about this yesterday, the decision to close borders to the UK and issue travel bans for those further out was at the national level. Different EU countries made their decisions at different times. Wasn't an EU-wide thing. There was no EU directive there. The EU did collectively say yesterday that there would be a block-wide travel ban for a short period, but that was afterwards to make sure there was no sneaky circumventing the bans by going to one country that didn't have a ban and then hopping to the other one where there was. You know, like Boris Johnson's father did in the summer. But regardless of what the EU decided collectively, it's for the individual member states to choose for themselves, as some already did. Needless to say, the idea that we are very close to a perfect storm of worsening COVID situation, the graph at the moment looks horrendous, alongside the usual winter pressures and possible flooding, means that, you know, adding in a no-deal Brexit, or indeed any form of Brexit on top of it, would be utter madness. There have been numerous calls for the government to stop playing games now. Get an extension to transition period, even if it's a short workaround technical extension, whatever they can manage. You know, if it's just a shorter one than ideal, then maybe they could work on a longer one. In amongst all these calls, there are some saying that they don't understand why the government just don't do this now. I think they do understand. Sure, a government acting in the national interest would absolutely seek an extension, but a government acting in the national interest would have sought that extension back in summer when it was fairly obvious that COVID was a serious issue, and we weren't going to be able to deal with it by the end of the year in time for Brexit. You know, we don't have a government that acts in the national interest. And even if Boris Johnson was thinking that this situation was serious enough to extend, I would have thought he'd find it politically difficult to do so, because Nigel Farage also explains this. So he has joined in on the idea that shutting off the borders like this was a ploy to try and force Boris Johnson to agree to the EU deal quickly. Two problems with this line of thinking, though. One, there are non-EU countries, quite a lot of them as well, who have also issued travel bans, you know, from the UK. So what does he think their game is then? And two, Boris Johnson will not now even seriously be thinking about Brexit. In fact, when he was asked a question about Brexit in the press conference yesterday, he laughed. He may come to regret laughing at a question like that in a couple of weeks, but he laughed. You know, he's famously incapable of managing anything. The border closure has created an urgent crisis like no other he's faced in his life. I cannot say if we would have agreed a deal round about now without this latest COVID crisis, but it's surely got to be more likely now that we won't. Not certain, nowhere near certain in fact, but more likely. Unless, of course, he's already decided that he's going to agree to what is now currently on the table, and he just wants to wait for the last possible moment to bounce it through everyone without anyone paying attention to what's in the detail. I did wonder if Conservative MPs would start to pipe up for fear of how much of a mess Boris Johnson could make of this new crisis. However, mostly what I've seen are the sorts of MPs who want a no-deal Brexit, even under these circumstances. Arguably, especially under these circumstances. You know, if there are a decent number of reasonable Tory MPs out there, they're keeping rather quiet right now. I saw just one Conservative MP publicly calling for us to extend Brexit somehow. But the wider picture of hardline Brexiteers like Nigel Farage and the Daily Telegraph trying to claim that the border closures are a negotiating trick to get a Brexit deal means that, well, the intention is to make it politically impossible to agree a deal now, I guess. You know, it would look to Conservative supporters like Johnson had folded. Load of Brexiteers who these supporters trust are saying, oh, this is an EU ploy to get him to sign a deal. Then he signs a deal. He tries to sell it as a victory back home, but everyone goes, no, you just folded. It's like they said, that you've folded. You've got no backbone, mate. So no, this is certainly not a ploy to try and rush a deal that's already 2 months late. It's a move designed purely to protect their own populations against what Boris Johnson has told us is a rapidly propagated variant of the virus that's already laid low to different degrees every country in Europe. Finally, I do wonder if Nigel Farage might be into slightly unusual territory here, because he's made a career in politics from calling for something that nobody in charge would be mad enough to do, and then claim that his idea would have been brilliant because it's been perfect for him. Oh, he's enjoyed the gravy train as an MEP. He gets to call for us to leave the EU. Nobody would be insane enough to do it. And then someone was. So his calls for a no-deal Brexit are a good example of this. Because you remember last year when Boris Johnson looked like he was trying to get a no-deal Brexit, and even the EU was suggesting, oh, there's no need to extend the Article 50 period anymore. You know, we should just get a deal and be done with it. And Nigel Farage went off his head. He was raging at the EU. I think it was Jean-Claude Juncker, wasn't it, he was raging at? Saying, how dare you? If we want an extension, we should have an extension. Some of his supporters were looking at him going, what are you on about? I thought we wanted a no-deal Brexit. His idea of hell is to end up with something he called for, because then it's exposed. You know, his current calls for a no-deal Brexit may be made because he believes he's safe in the knowledge that Boris Johnson isn't as insane as he sometimes appears and will agree to a deal, or to some sort of technical extension of some sorts, that we're not going to be exiting on the 1st of January into a no-deal scenario. That way, Farage can claim that Johnson sold us out and that all the negative consequences of Brexit, even with a deal, well, that's actually because of the deal. That's what he wants to say. But Farage is still calling for a no-deal Brexit at a time where it is now seriously possible. He's literally gambling on Boris Johnson agreeing to a deal so that he can carry on grifting in his usual way. You know, this is a man who bet 10 grand on Donald Trump winning the election. He's not having a good time at the bookies right now. Boris Johnson has spent the last 3 days in emergency meetings about COVID and the closure of borders. Not Brexit. He's not really been having high-level meetings about Brexit, I thought. Parliament's already broken up. Johnson would be reluctant to recall it to face any awkward questions. He has said he'll recall it on December the 30th if there's a deal, but that is only to get the deal through. There won't be time for any bothersome questions, because there would be bothersome questions. He'd be getting awkward questions from opposition MPs about his cutting off of our supply lines, and also from his own MPs for his sneaky imposition of new restrictions after they broke for Christmas and couldn't vote on them. Just over a week to go before the end of the transition period. That's where we are now. And without a deal, everyone is going to see what happens when you do what Nigel Farage says we should do. I wonder if he's prepared for that. Or maybe he's right, and maybe Boris Johnson is going to agree a deal and Nigel Farage can breathe a sigh of relief. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.